Yes. Okay, thank you. I'd like to call this budget committee meeting together. First item of business be approve minutes of the prior meeting. Somebody want to make a motion? Motion by Mrs. Frazier, second by, I can't see. Oh, Peter McDevitt. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed, carried. Okay, we have no action agenda items, but we'll go right into discussing the 2021 budget. So I guess the way we'll do this is we'll just take questions from the floor. So does anybody on the committee have a question about any item in the 2021 budget? No questions about the 2021 budget?
I'll break the ice, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Kevin.
Supervisor Severs. Go ahead.
Budget Officer Gary. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
So my it's not so much a question as it really is just a follow-up from our conversation last week asking about the contracts. What I'm wondering is if there's a way we can just look at an informal policy for more consistency with the contracts so that on that list of approved supported organizations that we get for 2020, maybe 3 months into 2021, an after action report and how the funding contributed by the county is specifically applied to those organizations. And just so that that is consistent for every contract that we have. I appreciate the fact that Glenfell Civic Center comes in, they give a very detailed report, but I look at entities like the CBB or EDC, and I'm glad, Jim's here, and some other organizations, and I was just hopeful that moving forward, we could have a little more of an assessment tool so that when we go to make those contracts in the following year, we have a comparative to look at. If that, I have what was sent in for this year, but it's not complete.
Right. I think that's a good idea. I'm not sure after 3 months is appropriate. Maybe we could wait to the halfway point and have them review with us what their contract was stated for and what they bring, what they have spent it on. And
I'm sorry, I mean for the following year. So like at the end of 2020, if they submit a report within I don't know, okay. 3 months.
Oh, 3 months report. I think that's actual for past contracts.
Correct.
I just saw an update as we went along for the 2021.
I think it's great.
I think that's wonderful. Is anybody on the committee have any discussions about that? Because we have so many of them. Some will be easy to ascertain what they've done. Some will be a little bit more difficult, but certainly they can give us what they Supervisor Diamond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support that activity with Supervisor Prada. And I want to point out that the original RFP that was sent out, it called for an audit with CDB, at Lake George CDB, and to this day, I don't think we've ever officially seen an independent audit. So that, to me, means that I'd like to look closer at those numbers that Supervisor Siebert had suggested that we look at the end of the calendar year to measure the performance. Not only that, but with each independent organization that we run. So it makes sense.
So do we have to do anything to make that formal, Ryan, or do we just we should add it to their?
Sure, we could add it to the contracts that they'll do an after year report within I'll call it by the end of March, and we'll have the clerk's office communicate with or whoever communicates in the course of executing contracts that this is going to be the requirement going forward.
And the review process take part as part of the budget committee. We should probably do it there, or do you want to do it somewhere else?
It's the pleasure of the board, I think.
Okay.
I would suggest, Mr. Chairman, if it's okay with you, to have a budget committee meeting. I think that having more of those throughout the year can only lead to, that transparency we're all looking for and accountability with everyone's hard-earned dollars. But being able to sit down and kind of look at those reports and have a discussion about how things are moving forward would be helpful.
I also think that these organizations would probably all be glad to give a 2020 report, even though it's not in their 2020 contract. I think they welcome the opportunity.
Well, that's specifically what I'm asking, though, is that we get that 2020 report within 3 months.
Sure.
And then moving forward, if it works, and I suspect it would, that we just make that part of the award, as a a definite, but I would like to see it in writing to those organizations, as well as, I'm sure, Amanda, I know you have a lot of contact with a lot of these contracts, but some are in other department lines. So I think those department heads that work with them should be familiar with that request.
Yeah, I would suggest just an addendum to the contract and a one-page thing. Please present us a report by March of 2021 and 2020 activities, because I think most of them do, some don't.
Right.
And no, I think it's a great idea.
Thank you.
Any other? Yes, Supervisor Wild.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just for a point of clarity, I heard audit and I heard after action report. Can we get more specific in terms of what we're looking for? Are we looking for an audit where we're going to go through the expenses and expenditures that they did? Or is this just, here's where our goals and this is what we accomplished? I think it's wise that we set those expectations with these various groups so that they know what we're looking for before we go too deep into this.
Well, I'll have to use one that I serve on, the APA local government. Now, they use their money to put forth items of importance to the communities within the Adirondacks. Now, they do a summary once a year about what they've accomplished, but it's not an audit of their funds. I mean, are we looking at a fund audit, or are we looking at an activity, what you've done? Go ahead, Supervisor Siebert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I at least I can only speak for myself, Supervisor Wild, but I think there are some contracts that we have already that do require, like Supervisor Diamond pointed out, an audit. Is specifically you're referencing the CDB, but I think for the most part, what I'm looking for with these supported organizations is an after action report that's very typical anytime there's local, state, or federal dollars given, that is more of a performance objective, specifically on how the dollars are utilized that are coming from Warren County. I have some concerns about duplication of those dollars being spent, many different municipalities or other counties or whatever the case might be being awarded to some of those organizations. I think it would help to highlight what specifically Warren County taxpayers are getting for the contribution to these particular organizations at that 3-month mark. But that should not in any way override the requirements, Supervisor Wild, and some of those other contracts that we have where we are requesting fiscal audits. Those are already in place. And I think to Supervisor Diamond's point, we should probably follow up and see what the status is of how frequently those are filed and when they're recorded. And perhaps they need to come back to the underlying committee or to the budget committee. But the performance reports, I think, should come to this committee.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I agree.
I still don't understand, but you talked about how the funds were spent specifically for Warren County. So what level of detail are we looking for? We spent 5,000, we spent 5,000. This is what we got for. I don't know. So if I'm confused, I'm sure these organizations might be confused also. So if we can just be clear about what we're looking for in terms of detail, I think it would save us time going forward.
I'll try to speak to that, Mike. If you look at the original RFP, it requires an audit of performance audit, the monies and how the money's spent, what their balance sheets are, things like that. I just wanted to point out the fact that we've never seen one, but I think that, in this case, we can decide how we want to require them to show their performances and their balance sheets in another way, if that's better. But I was pointing out the fact of the matter is we had an audit. We do require audits in some of these RFPs, and I was just questioning why we've never seen one. That's all. Because it generally allows us to take a look at how we're spending our money and how they're performing at that level. So it's entirely up to the committee. It just makes sense at the end to look at their performances so we can measure whether they're working up to what we anticipate as their full ability or whether we need to go in another direction.
Supervisor Driscoll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Following up on Supervisor Diamond's comments, I've had a 40-year career in with not-for-profits, and every not-for-profit that I've worked with produce a report that provides both qualitative and quantitative information and it's blended together so that it's easy to read. It's hitting the numbers, but it's also hitting the goals and objectives. And those not-for-profits have been doing them since the beginning of time. So I'm pretty confident that the folks that we're asking this for, whether it's the Lake George CVB or any of the other organizations, are well versed in how to give us the information that ultimately we'll be looking for. Right. Thanks.
Anybody else? Go ahead. Supervisor Seaver.
Supervisor Wild, I can see why it can be confusing. I think what Supervisor Diamond's referring to is separate and apart from the performance reports that Supervisor Driscoll just explained. Those are just merely, like he said, performance measure that many organizations are familiar with. There are contracts that, notwithstanding, we have an obligation to have these fiscal audits. And usually those are around those huge chunks of money, like the Civic Center, or like the CVB. So, I don't want to confuse things. I'm just asking for a separate performance report, which is an after-action report, very typical in any type of grant funding.
So just for clarity, Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, there's no independent audit of the expenses and where they went for Warren County. Audit can mean different things to different people. So where are we going here? Are we going to bring in KPMG or some other kind of big consulting firm or local auditor come in and audit these?
No, I think it's clear. It's clear to me what we're looking for is that if we give you X number of dollars, if we give you $10 and we tell you to buy $5 worth of penny candy, bring us in a report, tell us what you spent the $5 on. I think that's easy to ascertain. The ones that give more detail of a financial audit, we'll accept those too. But I don't think we're going to make anybody go out and spend $5,000 on an external audit to prove what they did with our money we give them, but we want to have facts and figures. As I said, I'm looking at, if anybody studied the information that was sent to you, there's a report given by, I'm just using the APA Local Government Board as a full-page report on what they accomplished the past year. And this is in August 2020 on what they did in, I assume, 2019. So those are the type of things I think we look at and see, do we get value for contributing $7,500 to APA local government? That's the way I look at it. Supervisor Simpson, and anybody up on Zoom wave because my eyesight's not the best, but Supervisor Simpson.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. In the past, every year, this has kind of come up periodically. And I know that we have asked organizations to come in when there were questions. I can specifically remember ANCA, and they do issue a report. And I'm not sure if everybody here receives those reports on the board, but it's a yearly report that explains what they did, their activities. But I think what Supervisor Diamond was saying, just follow the contract, follow the terms of our contract, and ensure that we're doing everything we should be doing on our part, and then bringing in people if we need to.
And we'll just make the budget committee as a clearinghouse where we can keep track and make sure we're receiving them by the 30th of March. If we don't, we can convene or reconvene and say, hey, you're delinquent on your report. We need to hit it. So, and then we'll convene meetings so we can go through each contract. We certainly have a list. I know Amanda keeps a good list of the contracts. So. Any other discussion on contracts? Yes, Supervisor Beatty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All good points. I know a lot of supervisors always want to know our ROI, return on investment, how our dollars are spent, because it's not our dollars, it's the taxpayer dollars. So they want to know how their money's spent. I can give you one example. Although we didn't give a lot of money to the Lake George Lake Champlain Regional Planning Board, that basically ran amok for years. We still kept giving them $5, $7, $8 a year. And there was no accountability. In fact, some supervisors didn't even know if they were on the committee or not. So I think Ms. Sieber wanting within 3 months, an accounting of how the money's spent and what type of return basically the taxpayers got for their dollars is very commendable. And I think it's the right direction. Some of these organizations have got millions of dollars in the last 10 years, millions. I mean, that's a lot of money. over the last 10 years. So and they're good organizations. No one's questioning their organizations. What we need to do, though, is be responsible to the taxpayers. And so they feel comfortable that their tax dollars are being spent in a worthwhile way, in a worthwhile manner, and that they're getting a return, the taxpayers, a return on their investment. So, yeah, I'm 100% behind this. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Anybody else? Supervisor McDevitt?
Thank you. I think we all agree in this body that, we need a worthwhile return on investment, and the taxpayers' dollars are critically important. I think when it comes to economic development, I don't know if we can get down to a total degree of specificity. It's not like an average department within county government. The factors that go into attracting a new industry to this part of the world are obvious factors and not so obvious factors. When Ed was here, one of the things he did for the city of Glens Falls is he got $10 million for the city to revitalize parts of South Spring. That was really important. And what does $10 million mean when you work it into our economy? What kind of things does that spur? What kind of sales tax dollars does that encourage? So that was something that he did. And as being a representative of EDC, I can remember one morning I spent with Ed. I think we had it was a 10 or 11 o'clock appointment down at the Helmet organization. And these people, got a little bit of help from EDC, a company, Big Boom Road in Queensbury. Ed and I walked in the building at 11 o'clock, and 2.5 to 3 hours later, we walked out, okay, to maybe show you the concern that he had, and as a result, EDC to ensuring that industries stay here. And so I think, can we be very, very defined in terms of saying, gee, we need to cut you 3 or 4%, when indeed it's not quite that easy. The moment Jim brings a new industry into our North Country, I think we'll be jumping up and down saying how we're appreciative of that. So my point is, I don't think do we need a report? Should Jim and company come forward? Absolutely, as transparent as possible. But it's a little more difficult to take an EDC and look at their bottom line and treat them like just any other department within the county, because it's there's a degree of irregularity involved when someone is out there attempting to get an industry for Warrensburg or Stony Creek or Lake Luzerne or Johnsburg. Okay, and so my point is, need the information, need to come forward. But if someone's looking for a return on investment, I don't think you can objectively do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Wild.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just one more thing. I am all for getting an analysis in terms of how our money was invested and what kind of return we got. My question earlier was basically just to identify what that report looks like. And I don't mind working with any supervisors on the committee or the board to come up with some kind of template that we can get a consistent report from all these different organizations that we support, so that we have a way of being able to at least measure that. And what I'd like to avoid is next March or whenever we have these reports coming in, we start asking different questions to these organizations. And I'd like to be able to anticipate some of those questions and have it as part of that after action report of Supervisor Seaver sent. So again, I'll offer my services to help with whoever you might choose to help come up with some kind of report that will work for all these instances, or at least for many of them.
I think that's fine. Supervisor Seaver?
I was just going to suggest, Supervisor Wild, that perhaps this year we just ask for, some of, like Supervisor Garrity mentioned, some of these organizations do send letters and updates on how they're utilizing funds. But it would be great to be able to see that full list of supported organizations and just maybe for this year, look at the reports that they're sending in, giving them free rein to talk about how they believe that contribution has benefited our community. And then I think it might be a great idea during the budget committee to start talking about how do you devise that form, taking a look perhaps at some of the forms Supervisor Driscoll has seen with local, state, and federal grant funding and putting together. There's certainly many templates out there for after action reports. But I guess I'd love to see just what they have to offer in terms of a qualitative analysis this coming March, and then put together some type of report based on our first round of looking at things for the future, make it a little bit easier for them. I agree a form might be great. I just don't know if it's premature without seeing exactly every organization's quick after action report to us to put together that now. Certainly we're dealing with that with occupancy tax and the forms that we have there. We've been revising and talking about formally trying to change that for years. So I think it is a long process, and it might be nice to have some of that data in March before we jump ahead and make a form that we would require. But the bottom line is just trying to find out how the money's being used. Is it helpful? How could we collaborate and share services a little bit better and have that accountability? It's just a quick checks and balances. And I think Supervisor Simpson mentioned, we've been talking about this for a long time.
I think that this is a start, and the ones who can provide us more of an economic detail, they will, the dollars and cents detail. Those who can give us a summary, we'll do that. And then if we're not satisfied after receiving the reports this year, we'll dive in to more on it right now. But I just think to try to sit here and come up with a report today is not what we're looking for. We're looking to get what they're supposed to do according to the contracts, get that out to them. And let's, after we get them the first time, if it's not satisfactory or what we were looking for, we certainly can go back to them and give them more time and then be a little more detailed and develop something that we want to see from them. So is there any more discussion on this? So can I have a motion to send a letter out to the contract holders and to ask for this report by March 30th, 2021? We have a motion by Supervisor Seaver, second by Supervisor McDevitt. Any other questions? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carried. Okay. Any other questions for the budget committee? Anything on the budget? Anything? Okay.
Good job.
Anybody? I know EDC is here. Would we like Jim to address the group while he's here, please? Jim, could you address the group?
Morning, everybody. I'm Jim Cipollone from the EDC, for any of those that you don't.
You have to speak right into that mic. Can you hear me?
Is it working?
Yeah, it's on, isn't it?
So we're going to go ahead and put a couple of charts up here. I'm here this morning to try to make sure that we fully address any question that has ever been raised in my dialogue so far since I came into the organization a few months ago. I can't promise it's every question you've ever had about EDC, but it's certainly all the questions that I've been party to. If you don't mind, can we click to the next chart? There's many things that I know all of you are aware of, or at least some of them, about what has changed in our environment. This year, we started with the intention of attempting to revalidate and set a plan for the EDC that looks forward to what not only the county needs, but the community of businesses and the other municipalities that we serve. And that was a pretty extensive effort, and some of you were involved in gathering that information. So in the spring, we were preparing to actually begin to implement that. And then, of course, we all have been dealing with the impact of COVID. It has dramatically changed our focus areas, I would imagine, particularly in our contact with the county. I don't believe we've ever been as deep in ongoing every day, every week type of dialogue with county as we are right now. And I think it's been very positive, but it's also been a huge shift in terms of where we spend much of our time. And then finally, we all know we lost somebody who is irreplaceable, somebody who had remarkable relationships, network, and experience. And that forces us to address many, many things. It forces us to address how we want all these various economic development entities within our area to work. It forces us to address maybe processes we took for granted from somebody who knew them better than any of us. And that's what we've been attempting to do. Now, in that process of engaging not only all of you, but anyone that we could possibly engage, particularly some of our large business organizations that are here and organizations that are considering coming here, there have been several areas that have emerged. Perhaps the most pressing one that I heard was the need not to simply throw ourselves at the subject of infrastructure and in particular broadband, but for us to, in a specific way, try to fill the gaps and try to provide information, try to provide problem solving, try to provide leadership, particularly when multiple entities were working towards the same goal. Not only the county and municipalities, but perhaps organizations within the area. And our goal here was simply to align these efforts. I think we're making some steady progress here. It also led to us this year spending money in a way that is not traditional for the EDC. When the call came out that said that we really need better information around our broadband inventory, one of the very first things I brought to my board was the money that would be required to update the county's inventory maps. In the past, I think what we might have done is come back to the county and said, in order to do this, it will cost this amount of money. And that wasn't in our original scope of work when we started the year. And so we would either seek to have you fund that or to seek a grant to fund that. That's not how we did it this year. Our board literally met as quickly as I could get a proposal in front of them. We set out on that effort, and we simply spent whatever it took in order to get that information so that we had it available to not only us, but any entity within the county that could use it. When I've spoken to our state and national representatives, they applauded this effort because they said that the information is going to be fundamental to our ability to apply for any available funds in the coming year. And we didn't get lost in the idea of how are we paying for that. But that was a shift in the way the EDC works. And I'm not so sure that very many people noticed it. Going forward into this coming year, I imagine we're going to have to do that in a whole variety of areas. I've identified several of them here. So not only in terms of broadband on the infrastructure side, but in terms of water and sewer. We've engaged deeply, for instance, with the community of Johnsburg and North Creek, trying to figure out how could we help them overcome the obstacles that have led to them not having a wastewater system all the way to these times. And the support that we're looking to provide is independent analysis of the economic benefit of such a system, and also gap funding in order for us to get the information that would allow us to apply for the next wave of grants. We will approach it the same way we have approached broadband. It's part of our responsibility as your entity in the county. And as long as these expenses are modest and reasonable, we will simply address them as they arise with our own board. In the areas of professional relocation, I've raised this many times. There's been a fair amount of press coverage about this. Every day, when I woke up this morning, there's 3 articles, one from NPR, one from USA Today, one from the New York Post, that talked about the exodus, not only in general, but specifically from New York City. This is an enormous shift that is occurring right now. And we must gather information that allows us to understand and also participate in this in a way that we want to. It is happening whether we want it to or not. But what I'd really love us to do is to be able to have as much information as we could possibly have about who's coming, who's considering coming, why would they come here, how do we become visible to the entities that we would love to have join our community. That's going to require a lot of forward thinking. This is not a channel of economic development we've ever thought about before. We've thought about economic development in terms of companies or factories that would employ 20, 30, 50 people. This is a wave that is coming one person at a time. But at the same time, it's very plausible that at the end of the year, we could have several hundred people here in our county who chose to come here, who are professionals in their field. And when that net effect of all that is measured, it would be as if we brought a large manufacturer here, if we are able to gather the information and see what the economic impact is. It's always going to be to our benefit to manage this the way that we want. This diversifies our tax base, and it provides us with skills that we wouldn't otherwise have in our community without any overt incentives or programs. And the impact is almost immediate. Tourism support. I've been counseled many times that the road is littered with bodies who have waded into the field of tourism. So I say this with some amount of trepidation. But just like in the area of broadband, our goal is not in any way to usurp anybody that's already working there. It's to figure out what are the gaps that need to be addressed that help us get to places we've never got. A 365-day-a-year tourism industry helps us solve many structural problems. There are communities across America that have also set out to do this. Some have succeeded, some have failed. We need to get that information so that we learn and we can do this in the most informed way. There's data involved in this. We've talked about how would we gather it. Cell phone data, for instance, about people, how long they're coming and where they're coming from. These are areas that we might be able to assist. We have no agenda here other than to figure out how do we help. We know that tourism is a very large part of the economic engine of our area. And so it is appropriate for us to engage there. But it's to engage as a partner. It's to engage as a aligned, synergetic person at the table. Finally, I would tell you, communications and measurement get at some of the things you've just been talking about for the last half hour. One of the things that I can understand that you might be frustrated by is understanding what goes on in an organization like ours. We don't do a very good job of communicating proactively about what we're doing, and we certainly don't do a very good job of being proactively available for people who don't even know we exist. If you run a 4-person marketing organization in Brooklyn, this mythical organization that I've been talking about for months that is looking to move, they don't know who Warren County is. And when they go to social media, we're not there. We have to be there. We have to be on Facebook. We have to be on Instagram. We have to be on LinkedIn, and we have to have compelling content when we're there. Now, we've invested in some of this already. Our website has a remarkable back end. I've been poring over that for the last few weeks, and the data that is available there that is updated almost real time is fantastic. But we don't have it organized in a way that anybody could really get at. Well, where could you live in Warren County that would be within a 20-minute radius of the city of Glens Falls? What would your commute be like? What would housing costs be? What's the educational density of the particular community you're looking for? All that information is available right now, except for the fact that we don't have it structured in a way that you can get at it. It's going to take some money. It's going to take some people that we don't have. I don't know how to do it. I know we need to do it. I also know that we need better measures. You've been talking about it right now, trying to help you and your constituents figure out what value are you getting for money. That's a fair question. And I also appreciate what several of you said in terms of the fact that economic development is a vexing area to gather this from. It often involves efforts that take multiple years to come to fruition. And a lot of times the things you launch out for, you do not accomplish. That does represent a challenge. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't have gone after that particular employer, even if we didn't win. But we still got to be transparent about what are we doing and how are we doing it. We're going to start with big measures, the things that matter to us all. What is our unemployment? What is our tax base? What is the total number of businesses? What's the total number of residents? And then we're going to break down in these specific areas with some measures that we believe will give us some sense of whether or not we're making progress. And we will look for your feedback as to whether or not these measures are on target and they're delivering value. And if they're not, we'll continue to change it. In terms of the process of how we got here, I really believe that the only way this works is for us to be deeply involved with each other. And so from the time I came in the early parts of August, I was actually brought in the last day of July. I think I've met with county representatives more than I've met with any other entity inside of Warren County. And I'm proud of that. We've had many, many meetings with not only this body and the Board of Supervisors, but with committees and with the individuals that serve the county. And we're better for it. We've also met with the city of Glens Falls and the town of Queensbury to validate whether or not the things that we've been doing are the right things going forward. When we put all this together, it's made for a complicated process. In the past, we would have presented a budget to you much, much sooner because we would just be continuing to do what we have always done. We can't continue to do what we've always done. We have to do new things. In order to do new things, I got to figure out what they cost. My board turns around and says, well, what kind of money might we have? I don't have the answers to either of those questions. And as a result, it took us many iterations to get to where we are now. I think it probably was frustrating for some of you. It was definitely difficult for us. But the budget that I'm proposing to you, which I'll show you a summary of in just a moment, is the result of a very, very rich exchange with all of you and many others. You mind flipping for me? One other thing I wanted to point out is that the Camoin study that started our year also told us, gave us somewhat of a roadmap. And we've talked about giving you a full formal debrief of that. But some of the most important areas that that study called out for are things that the areas that you and others have shared with us are aligned with. Infrastructure support and building resources around that. Organizing ourselves around key business segments like medical device and healthcare. I've been talking, for instance, with the town of Queensbury about how we help them better support the medical device industry, which is largely based in the town of Queensbury. That supports not only Queensbury, but it supports all of us. A healthy medical device industry is one of the great economic drivers for this entire county. The rationalization of all the various organizations. We've tried to meet with every economic development organization in the region to figure out, is the relationship that we currently have with them the right one going forward? And that was called out for in the Camoin study. Also, in the Camoin study, they said your communications approach needs a complete overhaul. So if you look at the independent validation that came from Camoin, it lines up with much of what many of you have been saying. When you put all this together, and I'm going to show you the budget in a second, what we're trying to do is reorganize our staff to be about the same size we were 2 years ago. If Ed had come to you in 2019, he represented a 4-person organization. Today, we're a 2-person organization. It's me and Sean Wheatley. And that's obviously not going to work to take on all of this. But we're also acutely aware of the fact that we cannot dramatically increase our surface area. We've got to do this in incremental steps. So our very modest approach this year is to take the admin who is currently a temporary and convert that position to a full-time position that will largely be around economic development administration. That will have a very large role in terms of supporting the county's LDC. That will be where all the county LDC records are kept, all of the applications are funneled, and all of the dialogue occurs. That person's also going to be involved in digitizing the more than 10 years worth of files that we are trying to deal with that come from our loss of Ed. We're also going to hire a communications director because we think that all of it starts there. We've got to figure out how to be present in all these platforms. And so the budget that I'm about to show you, it talks about going to 4 people, but it's important to remember if we did that, we would be about the same size as we were 2 years ago. I know this is hard to read, but let me just tell you what this summary essentially says. The top goes over our sources of revenue. And those sources of revenue are dominated by the support that we get from the county and from other municipalities, the town of Queensbury and the city of Glens Falls. In every case, we went to them seeking no more than flat funding from the previous year. But we're still anticipating that there will be less money available to us from those entities in the coming year as what we had last year. That's prudent. Also, from a membership support standpoint, last year, we got less than $10,000 from our members. And that's because most of our members were worried about whether or not they were going to be able to keep their doors open. And it made no sense whatsoever for us to come to them with a bill that said, here's what you need to pay in order for us to continue to advocate for you. We need to advocate for you, and we'll sort out whether you can afford to pay for us later. In the coming year, we've revamped our entire membership approach, and we're hoping this coming year to get back to maybe 60% of what was our traditional base. And then finally, there's very little interest income. When you look at all of that together, it will be slightly more than we had this coming year because we believe that our membership from our members will be better than it was in the past year. but our income from, or revenue from municipalities would be slightly less, a little over $500,000. If you look at the expense lines, to add the two people that I've just shared with you to get back to where we were in 2019 will cost us, and by the way, every single one of those people, other than the traditional increments associated with the cost of living raises for being a public or pseudo-public employee, are working at the exact same levels that they were 4 years ago. But to do that is $435,000. So almost all of the money that we have available to us is tied up in people. In addition, I've looked at doubling the amount of money that we would invest in things like I shared with you before. Infrastructure and associated information and studies, professional relocation and data around that, communications overhauls and the expertise and data that we will need to do that. I've also looked to reduce the amount of money that we spend on ourselves. Last year, we spent more than $100,000. A lot of it was caused by that Camoin study. And I'm not sorry we did it, but we certainly can't support that kind of investment every single year. In the coming year, we will spend significantly less on our board and our organizational development. Our occupancy expenses, things like, you know, where our office is and what we have in way of traditional overhead. There is a slight increase here, and I make no apologies for this either. We are investing in data security. I think all of you understand how dangerous the world is in the IT space. We're trying to make sure that we stay at the state of the art. We have financial and sensitive data, years of it, and we need to make sure that we protect it. So there is going to be a slight increase in that area. Other than that, everything else is flat. When you look at that, the net of all that is that I'm proposing that we spend more than $150,000 beyond the monies that we would bring in as revenues. That brings us to, do we have that money? Would you mind flipping? What this is there's 2 pages from our balance sheet. I've literally done the straight copy from our bookkeeping files. The first page goes through what are the assets. And the top tells you about the liquid assets, the current assets that are in bank accounts, a little more than $1 million. There's a great mythology around this, which I'd like to make sure that we address today. This $1 million came from grants that were set up to build the EDC. It did not come from hoarding cash over years. However, I will tell you that over the last year and a half, we have not spent to our budget. That's on us. But it doesn't come from 15 years of taking more money than you spend. It comes from the fact that there are programs that we started with several $100,000 and we had to keep several $100,000. I'm going to go through that in some detail. There's a bunch of illiquid assets, things like accounts receivable, prepaids, and fixed assets like the land we hold and the costs associated with that. Anything that we capitalize, like the website design that we did several years ago. There's almost $200,000 of those type of fixed assets, which we could not convert into cash no matter what we did unless we sold all of those things. So what we're really talking about is this $1 million of cash. If you turn the page to the equity and liability side, and I think Supervisor Diamond did a fair job of trying to express some of this in a previous meeting. But under the areas of board designated, there are 4 areas where we have no, what I would consider to be discretion here. The operating reserve is the guidance that we're given by the ABO and other accounting entities that audit us. And they, you are required to carry a certain amount of cash to overcome any funding irregularities during the course of the year, like what happened this year. Trying to collect monies from the state of New York has become very, very difficult. So the guidance runs anywhere from 4 to 6 months. We carry 4 months. It is at the low end of that, not at the high end of that. 4 months worth of expenses that we reserve every year. I think there's a case being made that we should actually increase that based on our experience this past year, but we have not done that. The property carrying costs are simply the costs that are required statutorily for us to reserve every year when you own property. The taxes, the maintenance, and the insurance on that property must be reserved on your balance sheet. The Queensberry projects are monies that came over when Queensberry merged their local development organization and their economic development organization more than 10 years ago. They were doing it independently. A cautionary tale, by the way. If Supervisor Stroud were here, he would tell you that they used to spend between $150,000 and $200,000 a year to do less good. It cost them $150,000 in personnel alone. If they were to invest any money on programming, they spent $200,000 in a given year. The EDC went to them and said, we will do this for $14,000 a year. Halving their costs 10 years ago, never increasing the amount that we draw for that. And I think if you were to talk to the town of Queensbury, they are very satisfied with what they've gotten as a result. The reason I share this with you is not only that, and by the way, that $137,000 came over in that transfer and must be reserved for any projects the town of Queensbury requests that we perform for them. But this is an example of how this works. One of your own entities recognized that it made more sense to synergize this and to get the integration value of working on this as a collective area rather than as an isolated entity. Finally, the Regional Loan Fund. Many years ago, more than 12 years ago, we applied for a grant that required, it was a revolving loan fund, and as long as that revolving loan fund is open, we must reserve $50,000 against any potential losses. There's almost no risk here. All those loans and all those funds have been allocated, but the program has not been closed. So as long as it's open, we've got to hold $50,000 on our balance sheet against that. That means that there's more than $500,000 that is already essentially spoken for. What does that mean? There's $450,000 worth of addressable cash. The budget that I proposed to you is to take 1/3 of that, $150,000, and invest it on behalf of our community. How do we choose that number? We chose that number because none of us can be certain about how long the situation that we're in is going to last. So we took as conservative a view as we could. For 3 years, we would be able to invest at this level without asking for any more money from you or anyone else. Now, I know there's some concern about what happens at the end of that 3 years. 3 years is a long period of time for us to address whether or not that investment level is the appropriate one and what are other funding sources, including greater costs from our private members, to address. If I am willing to take the bet that over 3 years, we will find a way between you, our other municipal partners, and our members to sustain a greater investment for greater outcomes. But if not, I believe it is still the right move to make. I do not believe that we should sit with reduced capacity. I believe that we should go with increased capacity. There is nothing, and I believe this fervently, there's nothing our community wants more other than being safe and healthy, than to know that people are worried about their economic futures and have a plan and investing in it. So we've tried to find the middle path here. If you don't mind, if you go to the last chart, this all nets it out for you. I came here because it's important. I meet with my board tomorrow. I'd like to know that we see this eye to eye. I've done that now with the town of Queensbury, and I've done that with the city of Glens Falls, and I would like to know that we're in that same position with the county. I know that until your budget is approved, there is still some level of uncertainty, but I wanted to make sure that we brought you all the information so that you could feel comfortable with the level of investment that you choose to make. I would also like to point out to you that tomorrow I'm going to bring this budget to my board for approval. We need to move forward on this. We can't wait much longer. When we get done with this, there will be 4 people, John Wheatley and I, a communications director, an economic development coordinator, which I propose to convert the person that's sitting in that chair. And we currently contract for between 10 and 20 hours a week to do part-time bookkeeping. I'm going to propose that we continue that. We're going to begin to invest in these new program areas. We're going to manage our overhead and internal spend. We brought that down in this year's budget. And we're going to propose that we spend more than we have because it's the right move. Last thing I would point out to you is this is the beginning, not the end. As Supervisor Sieber and many others have pointed out, there is a thirst for understanding about where is the money being spent. I don't view that as a negative. I think anybody that chooses to engage in wanting to learn more about how this money is going to be spent is actually the kind of citizen that we want. The more they learn, the more I think they're going to appreciate it, and I think the more they're going to desire it long term. So what we have to do is figure out how to make that information digestible to them and meaningful to them. And I don't know if we'll get that right at the beginning, but we will engage in a process until we all feel like we have that right. So, not the last of many meetings, I hope, but maybe the last that we have about how we're going to approach next year's budget. Are there questions?
Go ahead, Supervisor Diamond.
Thank you. Jim, just a couple of questions. I think in your presentation, you mentioned that you're going to spend down your fund balance for the next 3 years. So you're not going to be asking the county to increase their subsidy for the next 3 years. Is that correct?
I don't know whether that's true or not. I think next year we'll go together and we'll look at the information and decide. You may decide you want more than what we're giving you, and we may decide that we want to invest more. But right now I have a plan where we wouldn't need to do that.
Right. Okay. I'd like to hear a little bit more about your intentions, your efforts for job recruitment and specifically some sites in the city of Glens Falls that are industrial sites, about what your plans on marketing efforts for that. Maybe that's something for another day. Let's not get into that at this point in time.
I think in terms of detail, it may be, but I did want to share with you something that we do as a matter of course. I brought a copy of it. It's, I'm just going to hold it up so you can see. This is 6 pages of the active economic inquiries that we have. These are entities that have contacted us to explore business, some of which are existing businesses to expand and some of which are new. Of this, there's more than 100 entities. Of those, 29 of them have shown up since I got them. Of those, about 1/3 are in the city. Now, that's just what is. I met with Mayor Hall the other day and clearly heard his need to prioritize, for instance, a revamped marketing approach for Tech Meadows. We also continue to want to figure out what's the right development path for Queensbury Park, which are the properties that are over by the airport that are adjoining county-based properties. But all of this is consistent with us continuing to try to attract, retain, and grow business in this area. I can tell you that the portfolio is healthy. The problem is that there is no state monies to match. So if you're looking to expand a facility or build a net new facility and you're looking for the traditional sources of state aid that you would apply for through something like a CFA process, it's not likely to occur. So unfortunately, we're trying to figure out how to help organizations either self-fund through this period of time, debt fund through this period of time, or wait until they can. And there's very little that I can do about that. What we do is work very aggressively. Somebody mentioned Kirsch Helmets the other day. They came out with a public announcement of the fact that they're raising equity. That's what happens when you got no other choice. They've got to grow right now. If they're going to grow, there are no public funds available to them. They want to build a second line. They're trying to raise the equity in the private market to do it. I can tell you that company has the potential of being a game changer for our region. They came here from another place and they want to build their business here. They not only want to build their cool business that is doing something very innovative, it reminds me a little of Just, but they also want to do it with locals, particularly veterans and disabled workers. I feel like I'm talking to myself when I meet with them, and I'm thrilled. That is the ecosystem we want to create, is people who have a plan, people who are committed to that plan, and people who want to do it here. I believe we should do everything we can to support them. And I probably spend time with them every single week trying to figure out how can we help them, even if it's just connecting them with sources of private equity. I don't know if I answered your question, Supervisor Diamond, but we care deeply about the property in the city and all of the developable property here. And we've got an approach. I'm worried about how aggressive it's going to be in a year where there's very little funding.
Anybody else for Jim? Yes, Supervisor McGowan.
Joe, I just want to say thank you. One, for that was a great presentation. But I also want to bring up, and our planning board meeting for the town of Queensbury a couple of weeks ago, we had a little something on extending a project, and I stated, we had Jim Shipman that's, here, our new economic, God forbid, Ed, because those are some big shoes you're filling. But I said, give this guy a chance because he's got some some great ideas. You have a different look, a refreshed look. And, you just presented that again today. And so with everybody watching. So, I want to just thank you and I appreciate it. And you make such great sense because the following week, it was brought up in a meeting and we're going to follow up with it on a decision. And Mike Borges said he had just heard from you about bringing someone in to maybe work on this project. So I want to thank you for all you've done. In this presentation today, I feel really comfortable of you being able to hold on to the reins there.
Supervisor McGowan, your colleagues couldn't hear a word you were saying, so it got lost in translation. But that's okay. You don't need to repeat yourself. You don't want me to resolve. You don't need to repeat yourself. Anybody else? Any other questions? All I'll ask for is a copy of your slides for the board for everybody here, so we can take them. And then Supervisor Wild.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I just wanted to try to mention to the board that economic development, attracting companies is basically a competitive landscape. We are competing with counties all over the country. So we need to set for the right expectations. We have assets that we have that we feel we could probably win with, and I'm trusting of Jim. But we need to set our expectations realistically. We're competing with Saratoga, we're competing with Syracuse, we're competing with Rochester, we're competing with all sorts of other counties all over the country. So let's do our best to support him when he needs our help. I have a feeling that might be coming sooner than later. But thank you, and Jim, thanks again. Great job.
Yeah, Supervisor Conover. Did you provide them with a list of our capital projects? Do you know, did they get the county capital project list?
The last report I had on that was we all received from Wayne saying that they were going to get back on that. I thought he said later this year with the census and everything else. But I'm sure it's available for anyone that wants it.
Okay, and that's a good start for them.
I think it's a terrific start.
Yeah, thanks. Anybody else? No? Any comments from the community? Don?
No, Chairman Garrity, nothing at this point on YouTube.
Okay. Any comments from committee members? Anything else going forward on the budget? Supervisor Seaver.
Thank you. And Jim, thank you for coming in. I really appreciate it. I know that in the past, it's always been helpful to hear from Ed at the EDC at our economic committee meetings. So even just to know that long list of people looking to come here, that's great too. But I appreciate the information. My question is not related though to EDC, so I don't want to be rude. Can I ask, do you want me to wait? Oh, it's just when I'm looking at the budget, Kevin, and I'm looking at the OES piece of it, I know there's been some discussions recently around that additional fire coordinator position and the budget for that. When I look at the different pages that talk about the OES position and then also the fire coordinator position, I'm seeing that allotment at the previously discussed 10,000 on I don't know what page this is, the proposed budget, but under the, I think it's under the 3640 general civil defense line. Is that something that, how are we addressing that? The advertisement went out for 27,000, not the 10. Is that something you amend upon committee? Is that something we talked about? Like how, or has this been changed since before? I don't know. You can't change it once you change it, right?
You know, certainly we'll get with the budget team and we'll do the correct, get the correct amount in the budget. I can't answer that right now, so I have a conversation.
Okay.
Any other questions? I know we are getting a few questions from the departments on certain areas where we may have cut, but we are addressing them on a one-by-one basis, and our hopes are we don't have to make any adjustments to the budget as the way it is, but we certainly will take care of everybody's needs. We're not going to short anybody of any funds they needed to operate in 2021. Any other questions? Well, I'd like to thank Jim for coming in too, and it's been and we have copies of his presentation here for everybody to take on the way out. And then anything else in front of the budget committee? We've got some good projects we need to work on. I've got some good notes here, and we'll get the answer on fire coordinator before the board meeting. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. I have a motion by Supervisor Nyman, second by Supervisor Seaver to adjourn. We have one other thing.
We're not gonna vote on the insurance thing in this committee.
No, that was the support service. Okay, we have motion, a second. Any other discussions? All those in favor? Aye. Thank you. Thanks.